The challenge, should I choose to accept it, is to be unashamedly enthusiastic about books for 20 whole minutes. No salt allowed. Funny. Hi guys, it's Leanne and welcome to my favourite books of 2019. I felt like there were definitely some points in 2019 that I didn't actually believe that we were going to get here, because not only was 2019 the year of the trash fire, but it was also the year that conspired to make Leanne read less than she has for the previous 3 years. So I honestly did not think I was going to get here and I was going to have enough favourites to make my traditional top 10 list. Which is another thing, if you're new here, I should probably introduce you to this. I am never, ever going to make a top 19 of 2019 or a top 20 of 2020, because ain't nobody got time for that shit. You do not have the attention span and the stamina to listen to me talk about books for 20 books. I don't have the attention span or the stamina to listen to me talk, and I have to listen twice because I have to edit this. It's never gonna happen. It's just never gonna happen. So as always, I am bringing to you today a list of 10. And this time I actually think it's a final list of 10. I think this is honestly a top 10 wherein I have more or less managed to rank the books accurately, and I haven't added in any honourable mentions. Don't entirely know how I managed to do that, but here we are. As a final quick note before I launch into this list of goodness, I will not be giving too much in the way of a synopsis for each of the books in this video, because I have talked about some of them especially at some length during the year. As always, I will have all of the books typed out in the description with Goodreads links, so if you ever are in the position of being like, wait, what was that book, you can just scroll down, they'll all be there. Don't panic, Captain Mannering. That was possibly my most British reference I've ever done. Hit me up in the comments if you know what I was talking about. We will be forever friends. Am I now a person who says hit me up in the comments? 2020, the year that Leanne decides she's cool. Coming in at number 10 is possibly the most predictable addition to this list. I mean ever. You guys you're gonna know exactly what it is as soon as I give you the hints. So here we go. It's a completed 5-book series. I've chosen the middle book because I feel like the middle book is perfect. I have raved about this book so much this year. You know that scene in It's a Wonderful Life where they're like, every time a bell rings an angel gets its wings? I feel like this one is like every time a till goes ka-ching because Leanne has convinced one of you that you need this series in your life, that I should get some sort of treat, like, I don't know, an alcoholic beverage, except I don't drink. Chocolate, maybe just books. Maybe just every time one of you guys tells me you've picked up the series, I should just buy more books for myself. Why have I never thought about that before? And of course the book that I'm talking about is The Hollow Boy by Jonathan Stroud. This is book 3 in the Lockwood & Co series, and I finished the series this year. I started it in 2018, and honestly, as soon as I finished the last book, as soon as I just flicked the pages closed, I immediately wanted to start reading it again. This is a YA urban fantasy series in which ghosts have returned to the world and only people up to the age of about 19 are able to see them, and so agencies have popped up which are run by adults and use children to go in and get rid of these ghosts that they can't see, except this one particular agency is run entirely by the teens themselves. All of the kids are either orphaned or estranged from their parents in some way, and so it does that thing that I love the most in any kind of urban fantasy or fantasy novel, is found families. I love the idea of found families, and the 3 in this novel are just, I mean, there are so many side characters as well, I should point that out. Throughout this entire series, the side characters that pop in always feel fully fleshed out to me, and some of them have an equal place in my heart as the 3 main characters that we follow. But George, Lucy and Anthony Lockwood, and I feel like you can't not say his full name when you say it, they live together in a kind of ramshackle rundown townhouse in the middle of London, and they hate living together sometimes. George is not the cleanest person in the world. He leaves the remnants of food everywhere. He leaves coffee cups everywhere. He doesn't always clean his clothes very often because nobody's forcing him to. Lucy lives in an attic room with a talking skull, which, by the way, can I just say is the highlight of this entire series for me. I think anybody who has picked this series up and hasn't loved the skull in the jar is insane. I love the fact that all of their relationships are so interconnected and they feel so real. That all of them have had moments where they've absolutely hated each other and have been at cross purposes in a way that doesn't feel like it's just like that to further the plot. I feel like that's the main reason I've picked the Hollow Boy to represent the rest of this series, because unlike other series which are like 5 books, and there's always sort of like a middle book, isn't there, where everything is kind of like, well, it was the middle book, Chamber of Secrets. I feel like this book is kind of like you've moved away from home and you've come back and you've opened your front door and it's exactly the chaos, which is completely imperfect chaos, that you have left behind before, and you're reacquainting yourself with old friends and family, and it just feels right. Coming in at number 9 on this list is a book that I literally never saw myself reading because I felt like the story was so part of popular consciousness that I already knew all of the details, and I am so glad that on a whim I picked it up because I was so incredibly wrong, and that book is The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson. I bet that as soon as I said that title to you, you immediately went, yeah, me too. Exactly the way we do with books like The Exorcist. I feel like they've been around for so long and they're so popular and they're such, hi Grissom, they're such classic horrors that we do know a lot about them, and so we are less, or at least I'm less likely to pick them up, aren't I? Yes. Yes, I am. Hello. Well, that was nice. What was your favourite book this year? Do you have anything to contribute to this discussion? No, I didn't think so. Of course, we all know that the Amityville Horror is about the Lutz family. They buy an old farmhouse, there was murders committed in it, and the house slowly starts to drive them mad. And I think that was the thing that was never really sold to me. It was always sold to me like a demon / ghost novel, and I'm like, well, okay, but I've read a lot of those. This was not that. This was what I wanted from House of Leaves, and House of Leaves didn't even touch the sides. This one, on the other hand, was great. I listened to it on audiobook, and the audiobook was read by Ray Porter, who incidentally also does the Philip Marlowe series, which you guys know that I'm a massive fan of. And I don't know if it was recorded on purpose to sound like this or whether it just happens to be the quality of the recording, but it sounds kind of like you're listening to an old radio broadcast or an old record with the kind of pops and scratches in the background, and I felt like it really added to the atmosphere of this one. You guys know that one of my biggest things is place as character. I love when a town or when a house, in this case, is a part of the book as much as each of the individual people in it, and this one definitely achieved that because I felt very, very like there was menace from the first page of this novel. I felt very like I was getting goosebumps. Even when nothing was particularly happening, there was the promise that something was happening, you just couldn't see it. And I think that's something that a lot of modern horror novels lack. They go in for the big, almost CGI-like effects on the page, and they miss out the really slow building, horrible terror in the background. And that was definitely what this was for me. Whether you believe that it's a true story or not, I don't think really matters for the purpose of this book, because you forget, and that's the really interesting thing about it. So Jay Anson wrote this as a fictionalized account based on real interviews that he took with the Lutz family, and because of that there's kind of an almost journalistic flair to this one. I kind of felt sometimes like I was reading a non-fiction book, and then sometimes I would forget and it would slip into a kind of story mode where they were telling you how the characters felt, and the next time something happened I would be like, okay, wasn't prepared for that, so we're doing this now, that's great, And it was great. It was really, really good. And I think the reason that it made this list is because it's been a long time since I've read a horror that really affected me that way, and because it was such a surprise find. So number 8 on my list is a book that has literally haunted me all year since I read it, in a very different way from the Amityville Horror. It's a book that I finished and immediately had the impulse to start reading again, but wasn't sure that I could actually handle it because it affected me so deeply. And in fact, I have a bookmark halfway through it just now because I'm making my way back through it as we speak. And that book is, of course, Hi Matt by Nora Krug. Hi Matt is a graphic novel memoir about Nora Krug, who travels back to Germany to follow both branches of her family throughout what happened in World War II, because she realises that throughout her entire life she has an internalised shame of being German that she has grown up with and understood to just be part of her German experience. And I think that was one of the things that was the most difficult to process with this entire graphic novel, because as someone who identifies as LGBTQIA+++, I recognise growing up with internalised shame, and so it is incredibly, incredibly sad to me that that is a thing that has been happening for entire generations of German youth, and we don't talk about it. Depending on where you are in the world, history is written by the victors, and they don't typically give enough grey area in any history book anywhere to tell you how people must have felt on the other side of that divide. This graphic novel is a mixture of Nora Krug's really distinct style, her own handwriting, and pictures that she found in family archives. So I will warn you in advance if you do plan on picking this up, although I'm not going to show any of them here. There are several triggering images throughout this for things like the Holocaust. I really feel like if I was writing a list of Leanne's required books for life that everybody had to read as soon as they were able to, this would be on it. Coming in at number 7 is a book that took me completely by surprise. I read it at the tail end of last year and I literally have not stopped talking about it since, and it is Battle Scars by Jason Fox. Jason Fox, or Foxy, is one of the presenters on a Channel 4 show in the UK called SAS Who Dares Wins, wherein a group of completely insane people compete to win nothing except the right to say "I did not die" on a show which takes them through one of the phases of SAS selection, so like jungle warfare or desert warfare, etc. And Foxy is one of the ex-Special Forces soldiers who helps to run the show and who takes the contestants through their paces. And this is his memoir about PTSD and surviving toxic masculinity, essentially. So finally puts a point on how anxiety and depression suddenly manifests and feels that I felt like I was right there with him, and I think that's one of the things that stuck with me about this. I've never seen a battlefield, I've never been in any kind of horrendous position like that, and yet when he talked about his anxiety and his PTSD and how they just snuck up on him on a high street in between tours of duty when he was perfectly safe and knocked him off his feet, I completely related to that. I could literally read a sentence and say that is exactly how my body feels when it experiences that emotion, and I think that is insane that two completely disparate people can have so different experiences in their life and still understand the same emotion to feel the exact same way. And that really, don't know if you can tell, but also makes me quite emotional. The other thing I think this book does is the really important thing of debunking a lot of the myths about the armed services and soldiers. Foxy is somebody who loved the brotherhood, he loved the camaraderie, but when he realised that he had something desperately wrong in his life, he had nobody to talk to, because you cannot instill any kind of doubt into the guy next to you whose back you have in a situation where bullets are literally flying past your head. You cannot make those people think that you can't cope and that you don't have their backs, and so he was unable to talk about anything that he felt or experienced, and it put him into such a lonely pit of despair that he considered, as a lot of us with mental health issues have at some point, of just ending it. And I do not think that enough men in extremely masculine, assertive careers ever come out and talk about that, especially when you watch the series and so many of the guys look like they have things so together. The special moments on the show for me are where they sit the recruits down and they're like, no, but you don't understand. I have also been to the pits of despair. I have also been to this horrible place. It's so good. And even if you're not interested in any kind of army, SAS, battlefield, any of that kind of literature, I would still say pick this one up, because the way that it talks about getting help for mental health and how difficult it can sometimes be is groundbreaking. I was about to say that book number 6 lightens the mood slightly, but I don't know if it does or not. It is another book, weirdly, written by an ex-SAS serviceman about an ex-SAS serviceman, but this time it is entirely fictional. This is a book that just slammed into me in 2019, ran me down and dragged me behind it. It was so good and so surprising, and it is Remote Control by Andy McNabb, which is the first book in the Nick Stone series. I would never have picked this up on my own. This was one of Lovely Wife Helen's favourite books. It's such a random series for me. I'm not interested in spies, I'm not interested in international intrigue in the slightest, and usually I would stay away from books that were written by ex-servicemen about their experience, because sometimes it's a little bit like, let's reminisce all of the things that I did. This series is so not like that. It is so well written. It is so chock full of unexpected laughs in the grimmest places, and I think that's one of the things that makes me the most excited to continue to pick up books in this series, because I think sometimes thrillers and action adventures like this, when they go on for many books, they get grimmer and more dark and gritty as you go on, and they get more hopeless, and it gets more and more like they're bleak and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and this series is very much not like that. Also in this novel, about a third of the way in, Nick is forced to go on the run with the last surviving member of one of his friends' families, who is unexpectedly slaughtered in the very start of this novel. And this kid is she is one of my favourite characters of 2019, and their relationship is one of my favourite dynamics, because he is this guy who has never wanted to put down any kind of roots and doesn't care about children, and suddenly has this loud, needy little person who is telling him very clearly that she wants to watch TV, she wants to colour in, she wants to, I don't know, have a burger herself, and he has to keep stopping in the middle of what he's doing to be like, God, I have to look after this. But the relationship that the two of them get at the end of this, the understanding that they get at the end of this, is just so worth it. She has lost her entire family and he's all that she has left, and he comes to appreciate the fact that maybe being alone all the time is not really what he wants, and he didn't get that before. If you at all like British humour, the kind that was coined in like really dodgy 70s cop shows and has kind of just carried on under the radar up until now, you're gonna love this. So although I promised you that I was gonna be like smiley throughout this entire video and not salty at all, I have to break that promise just a little bit, just a tiny little bit, because this next book has a caveat with it. This is the first book in a series, a thriller series that I read 3 books out of this year. I desperately loved the first book. The first book is phenomenal. The second book is hella good. The third book was a huge raging disappointment that undid so much of the good stuff that the first 2 books did, that I now advocate that if you love the first book, read the second book and don't read any more. So before I poo-poo it anymore, let me tell you the things that I loved about it. This book is Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane. It is essentially about a woman who, in the very start of this book, finds out that her husband is a serial killer, and after he has gone through the prison system and is most thoroughly locked away and the key is not only thrown but melted, she has to take her 2 teenage children and start a new life. And they start a new life in Stillhouse Lake. This is another one of those books that has a place as character, because Stillhouse Lake itself is both very, very comforting to me. The thought of it is very comforting, but it's also very creepy and very atmospheric. And I think it does the thing that good parts of Stephen King novels do, where you look at this town as a town and you look at this little community around this lake where it's misty and murky and nobody really wants to talk to each other and neighbours don't interact all that much, and you think, yeah, that's creepy, but I still kind of would live there. Although the mystery in this book is so page turning, the mystery is almost perfect, because every time you are given something and you link a piece together, there is this huge other mystery piece that falls in your lap and you're like, what the hell do we do with this now? I don't know where this goes. What does this mean? Despite all of that, despite the fact that it's an almost perfect thriller in that regard, it's the characters in this book that really sell it for me. I started the book thinking, oh, I'm not really gonna like Gwen, and then, oh, she is amazing. She is a warrior woman. Like, Gwen is serious goals. And the kids, oh, Lanny, who is the eldest of the two here, she starts the novel as this surly, ungrounded, scared, sarcastic, really angry teen who has lost so much that she just doesn't think she wants to trust anybody, and she finishes it an absolute firecracker who will do anything for her family, and she knows absolutely what she wants, and it's amazing. Alright, book 4 on this list is a book that I also have to sit back and say, y'all were right, I was wrong, I should have read it sooner. Okay. And this book is, of course, The Martian by Andy Weir. You all knew it was coming, you all knew it was going to end up on this list, because I haven't stopped talking about it either since I finished it. This is one that I had actually watched the film of before I read the book, and that was another reason that I was like, no, I don't want to read it, the film was so good, I don't want it to ruin it. Of course, The Martian is about Mark Watney, who is a botanist and gets accidentally left behind on Mars during a mission and thinks he's going to die there. So he starts a diary, which is like voice recorded, where he talks about his struggles to, you know, grow potatoes on the surface of Mars, essentially. I was worried that this book was gonna talk down to me a little bit, because there are some extremely scientific bits in this book. There are some very well researched maths problems in here, and I didn't feel like that at any point. I felt like Mark was always doing a really, really good job of explaining to me, like a teacher to a small child, exactly how numbers worked and that this was what we were going to do, and I was just on board. He's stuck on the surface of Mars and he goes through the whole roller coaster of emotions that the rest of us have about death and dying, and will anybody remember me, and I'm so far away from home, I'm going to be left here alone, and it doesn't matter, I'm going to be dead, but I'm going to be left here alone. And all of those emotions were emotions that I really, really recognised. But in amongst it all, he does not fail to have humour. I also really, really loved the fact that this was kind of a modern take on an epistolary novel, right? So it is essentially a diary that you're reading somebody's diary, and I love books that are told through diary entries and logs and letters and things. I love this one. Mark Watney is so precious. I would read this again in a second, and in fact, a few times when I was pulling stuff off the shelf to film this video, I thought, oh, I could just sit down with it, couldn't I? No, Leanne, resist. I mean, honestly, you're rude. You're just rude. Who snores during a top books video? Apparently Grissom does. Grissom snores during everything. So number 3 on my list is another one that was quite unexpected to me. I found out about it before the hype train hit, and I just happened to read it before everybody was going insane about it, and I'm so glad that I did, because again, it might have been a book that I put off and didn't read for many, many months or years because it was so popular and I would have missed it. So at number 3 is Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a YA thriller contemporary, which is written in a really odd style. It's about Sadie, whose younger sister was killed and she then subsequently goes missing, and it is about the journalist who is commissioned to do a podcast on Sadie's disappearance. And you can listen to the podcast episodes of this online for free whilst also reading along with the actual book, and the podcast is recorded to sound exactly like a podcast. It has music, it sounds very professional. I didn't at any time think that I was reading a fictional book and then you would jump back into Sadie's point of view. I listened to this entire thing on audiobook, which I think really helped, because Sadie has a very pronounced stutter, and listening to her struggle to get the words out and articulate herself when she was in such dangerous situations and needed absolutely to be able to communicate was heart-wrenching. And I think it's so much more painful when you're listening to it happen in real time, and it takes her so very long to get each of the words out that you're just sitting there desperately wanting to fill the silences for her and guess her words. So I think that part was pretty amazing just all on its own, but also this book discusses the very real crisis that America is going through right now. I say America, I mean everywhere, but specifically America is going through, with young girls just disappearing. And if those girls don't come from backgrounds which are white and very privileged middle class, then those stories don't get reported and they just go under the radar and they're just gone. Those girls are just gone, never to be seen again, and it's horrendous. And that's one of the other things that I really love that this book does, is that it portrays Sadie's family in a very honest and brutal light, and it reminds you that there are other families out there who are not two parents, be they male or female, in a fairly stable relationship or in a, you know, fairly unstable or amicable divorce even, raising kids. There are other situations that kids in YA contemporary can be raised in, and I love that it went there. I love that it went the place where we're going more and more often recently, which is away from the escape stories, away from the people who manage to get out of these impoverished situations, and it actually tells the story about the majority of people who are living in these impoverished situations. So that was an incredible part of this book. But Sadie's whole story has really stuck with me in a way where if anybody asks me for a full cast audio, this is the first one that I recommend constantly and consistently. Now at number 2 is a book that I think is going to shock a few of you, because I am going to put money on the fact that if you were asked to pick my top 10 of 2019, you would have put this one up far higher, as in like at the number 1 slot with nothing touching it. And yeah, it just got pipped. It got pipped at the post right at the end of the year. I didn't see it coming either. And you know, that's why I never really understand how some people can get up their top whatever of whatever year on like the 25th of December. What if the best book I read is like in the last couple of days of the month? And I've written it down now, so it's locked in. Like, what do you do then? Anyway, the book that made the number 2 slot for me in 2019 was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is my beloved and battered proof copy. The actual finished copies look like this and this. I love the Australian copies of this book. I mean, look at this and then look at this. This book is a book that does everything that is a Leanne book, essentially. It is about a small group of people, a small community, but an even smaller family who are trying to process the death of their eldest brother Cameron, who has left his fully stocked, fully air conditioned, filled with water and food ute, has walked out into the Australian outback and has died very quickly of heat exhaustion while stripping off all of his clothes and lying on the grave of an old stockman, which just seems insane to them as well as it probably sounds to you. So there's this little group of people that are in this horrible position with all of these little things that have happened in their past, these little hurts, these little indiscretions, these little secrets, which are all of them just building on each other to make it so that it's impossible for anybody to completely be honest with anybody else, which of course again makes it impossible to try and work out what really happened. On top of that, because it is so incredibly remote, it is like a 2 or 3 hour drive to the nearest town that actually has any kind of medical facilities, and then it's a further drive than that to a city. It's insanely remote, and the place very much does become a character. The heat becomes a character, it becomes oppressive, it becomes something that you have to think about every single minute of the day. You have to factor it in, you have to think about it first before you do anything. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying to think that there are kids growing up there who they themselves have been brought up with this internalized respect for the land, because the land is what will make or break them. And both of those things, together with a mystery which is being unpicked slowly, and so leaving you with a really sinister taste in your mouth that somebody here knows something that they are not telling, somebody here did something that they shouldn't have done. All of those factors on top of each other just made it a perfect Leanne book. I absolutely flew through this. I scuttled through the pages. You should have seen me being like, "Don't talk to me, I'm reading." If I could have given this infinite stars, I would have. If anybody asks me now where to start with Australian crime, I tell them this before I tell them about the rest of Jane Harper's books and then other Australian authors. I tell them this because it's just so good. It's giving me goosebumps just thinking about it. Finally, the book that comes in at number 1 for me in 2019 was one of those books that I had owned for a really long time, and I had desperately wanted it to be an amazing book, and I had built it up so far in my head that I was like, if this doesn't live up to where I've put it on this massive pedestal, I'm going to be devastated. It took my expectations, it ran over them with a semi-truck, it backed over them again, and then it did this other thing that just blew me away. It was by far the best book that I read last year, and in fact I would go as far as to say it's one of my favourite books of all time now, and it is The Fact of a Body by Alexandria Marzano-Lejnovic. It says on the front, a murder and a memoir, and that is exactly what it is. Alexandria, when she wrote this book, was in her last year of her law degree. She went to work at a placement for a centre which dealt with death row convicts, and they would try and get their sentences commuted down to life without parole. She watches a tape, a confession tape, which, because America is weird, you can actually Google and see online, of Ricky Langley, who is a self-confessed child molester and murderer. And something about Ricky's experience, something about the story that he tells, clicks something in Alexandria's head into place, and she starts to have flashbacks to her own childhood. And so it's very much a memoir which has a present day murder mystery running through it, which I would very much call true crime, and then it has this very personal memoir at the back of it, wherein she realises that something really horrendous happened to her as a child, and that she has repressed it for a really, really long time. And she speaks to her parents about what happened, and not only did they know about it, but they didn't talk about it after it happened. And she decides that not only is she going to look into Ricky's case, and she gets obsessed with Ricky's case, but she's also going to uncover all of her family's secrets. And boy oh boy does her family have secrets. The things that she finds out are earth-shattering. They are change your entire perception of where you came from and how you feel about yourself level. However, the real reason that I love this book so much is both because it was so completely unexpected. Every time I thought I knew where we were going, something new would be revealed, some new secret would be unearthed, and I felt like I was on a complete roller coaster with the author throughout this whole thing, where she just desperately wanted to know where her place was in the world, and I felt that so badly. And then it did this other thing where every time a new secret was revealed, it took you further and further into a grey area, into an area where Alexandria was looking at these people in her lives who had done this horrible thing, this one horrible single instance of a thing, and she was trying to make that thing fit in the whole jigsaw puzzle of the rest of their life. She was trying to look at them as this one incident being the outlier, to this whole other personality, this whole other person that they were, these relationships that they have with other people. She was trying to understand how this person that she loved in her childhood could have done this horrendous thing, and she was trying to understand how a seemingly underprivileged, very sad, very lonely guy could have got to the place that he did, where he was confessing to the murder of a child. She wanted to understand his history, and she really put into context the things that happened, the actual crimes, with making these people human. And it took my head to places that I didn't think that I could go. It made me think in ways that I was really uncomfortable with, and so I think were probably pretty necessary. It made me think of these people as whole people, and that was a weird and uncomfortable and difficult situation to be in. But at the same time, when I finished this book, I felt like I was changed. That sounds like, I mean, we all look for that in books, right? We all look for that in our best books, our favourite books, that they change us and that they leave something with us. And I came out of this feeling like my opinions on so many things that I had felt solid on, just like Alexandria had felt solid about the death penalty when she went into this book and she left it with a very different opinion. I felt like things that I had had opinions on for such a long time, and things that I thought were implicitly true in my head, were no longer true, and that just blew my mind. The fact that I can get to 30 plus and have very definite views on some things and read one book and think you have no idea what you're talking about, you're wrong, you're so wrong about so many things. So yeah, this one very much got my #1 slot. I think I'm going to read it very many more times in my life. I also listened to this one on audiobook. Alexandria reads the audiobook herself, and I think if you can stand to listen to her voice cracking when some of the horrible situations in her life really affect her, and when she relives the moment of finding out some things that had been kept from her entire life, then I think that you should definitely try out the audio, because it's very, very powerful. I also feel like this is the kind of book that I want to have given to myself in my early 20s, because I think it would have made a lot of difference to me, and I'm sad that it didn't exist until later in my life and that I took even longer to read it. So there we go. That was my top 10 of 2019. I cannot believe that we've finally got to the end of this video. Grissom is still snoring at my feet. I'm sorry if you heard him throughout the entire video, but puppy comfort does come first. So as always, if you have read any of the books on my list, please let me know what you think about them in the comments, or let me know if I have convinced you to give any of them a try. And if you have a top 10 list, or a top however many list of 2019, please link me to it or let me know what it is in the comments. And you know, of course, if there are any of my top books that you just think are terrible or trash, or maybe on your worst books of 2019, then also let me know that, because I do love me an opinion. I'll be back very soon with my worst books of 2019, because I think that that one is very overdue. Bye! I mean, it's so cruel that he has to work under these horrible, horrible conditions. What am I doing to you?